She was just a stranger barefoot and drenched in rain standing on the side of a deserted road. No ID, no memory. Just one name whispered through trembling lips. Claire. What no one knew, not even her, was that she had vanished 2 decades earlier as the missing daughter of a billionaire. If you love stories filled with mystery, second chances, and the kind of endings that warm your soul, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we unravel one of the most emotional journeys we've ever told. Now, let me take you back to the night it all began on a rain-slicked road under the fading Colorado sky. The high plains of Colorado were bathed in the cold amber of dusk, the kind that made headlights look like searchlights piercing a forgotten world. Jake Lawson tightened his grip on the steering wheel as rain tapped nervously against the windshield of his battered Ford F-150. It was late October, and the weather had turned sharply a forewarning of the first snow. He just finished an emergency repair job on a cattle trailer outside Pueblo and was racing the storm home to his daughter, Emily. A static voice crackled on the AM radio. He reached forward, trying to tune it, but just as he did, his headlights caught someone on the edge of the road. He slammed the brakes. The truck fishtailed slightly before coming to a halt. Rain streaked down the glass in smeared rivers, distorting the figure ahead like a ghost from a dream. A woman, barefoot, soaked, standing still in the headlights like an animal unsure whether to run or collapse. Jake threw the truck into park, grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment, and stepped out into the biting wind. "Ma'am," he called out, cautious but concerned. She didn't move. He stepped closer, boots crunching against the gravel shoulder. She was in her early 30s, thin, pale, wearing a light summer dress completely inappropriate for the 40-degree weather. Her hair clung to her face and shoulders in wet strands. Her arms hung limply at her sides. Her eyes met his wide, searching, as if she were scanning his face for a memory that refused to surface. "You okay?" Jake asked again, lowering the flashlight beam so as not to blind her. "Are you hurt?" She didn't answer. Her lips trembled, and she finally whispered something barely audible over the wind. "Claire," she said. Jake took off his flannel overshirt and carefully draped it over her shoulders. She flinched at first, then let him. "Claire." "Okay. Can you tell me what happened? Were you in an accident?" She shook her head slowly. Then again, faster, like a reflex rather than a thought. I don't know." Jake's gaze moved down to her feet. Bruised. Dirty. Definitely not from any car crash. This woman had walked miles. The kind of miles people don't walk unless they're running from something. Or running to something they can't quite name. He glanced around. No vehicles, no footprints beyond hers, no sign of anyone else nearby. He made a decision. "I'm taking you to the clinic," he said gently. "No," she said instantly, stepping back, her face suddenly contorted with panic. "No hospitals." Jake paused, studying her. The fear in her eyes wasn't confusion. It was embedded, learned, real. He nodded slowly. "Okay, no hospitals. But you can't stay out here. I've got a warm truck and my daughter's at home. It's safe, I promise. Just until we figure this out." She hesitated, then followed him in silence to the truck. As Jake drove back toward Silver Ridge, he occasionally glanced over. Claire sat rigidly staring out the window as if the dark countryside held answers she couldn't reach. The dashboard heater blasted warm air, fogging the windshield at the corners. He kept the radio off. She said nothing except her name once. No mention of family, no location, no memory of where she came from. Not even the kind of small talk that trauma victims usually cling to like a life raft. Jake had done volunteer work for the sheriff's department back when he was still married, helping with missing person searches in the surrounding counties. He'd seen this kind of shock before, but something about Claire was different. She wasn't simply lost. She was disconnected, like her mind had shut certain doors and thrown away the keys. When they pulled into his gravel driveway, the porch light flicked on automatically. The little house stood in shadows surrounded by fields kissed with frost. Emily was visible through the living room window, reading on the couch, a bowl of popcorn at her side. Jake looked over. "We'll take it slow. You can rest here tonight and in the morning. We'll figure out next steps." Claire turned to him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Jake offered a soft nod. "You're safe now." He helped her inside, handed her a towel, and pointed her to the guest room. She moved like someone remembering how to walk. Emily peeked around the corner wide-eyed. "Dad." "Who's that?" Jake knelt down beside her, lowering his voice. "She's someone who needs our help. Her name's Claire. We'll talk more in the morning, all right?" "Ladybug," Emily nodded solemnly. As the rain picked up again outside, Jake stood by the window for a long time, watching the driveway, his gut tense. He didn't know who Claire really was, but every instinct in him said one thing. Someone out there was probably looking for her, and they might not be coming with good intentions. The first sound Claire heard was rain. Not the harsh patter of storm water on asphalt, but the softer kind dripping from gutters onto the porch roof, rhythmic like a metronome. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The scent of fresh linen and pinewood soap anchored her. Then the memory came back: the truck, the headlights, the man named Jake. She sat up abruptly on the guest bed, the oversized flannel shirt still wrapped around her shoulders. The walls were painted a soft eggshell white, the bed neatly made with a faded quilt. A small nightstand held a lamp and a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The room looked lived in. Real. Safe. Yet her heart beat like a warning drum. She moved toward the door and paused, hand hovering over the knob. A dozen questions crowded her mind, none with clear answers. Why couldn't she remember her last name? Where had she come from? Every time she tried to reach into the fog of her past, it pushed back hard like a wall laced with thorns. Jake stood in the kitchen, already dressed in jeans and a long-sleeved thermal. His hands worked expertly flipping pancakes while his phone lay untouched on the counter. He heard the creak of a floorboard and turned just in time to see Claire emerge from the hallway. She looked uncertain, barefoot, and still pale from the night before. "Morning," he said gently, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "You're safe. That part hasn't changed." Claire offered a cautious nod. "Where?" "Am I? Silver Ridge, about 30 miles outside Pueblo. Tiny town, barely a dot on the map. You've been here since last night." She glanced around, absorbing the neat kitchen. The spice rack alphabetized a framed photo of a little girl with dimples on the fridge. "You live alone?" "Not quite." Jake turned toward the hallway. Emily breakfast. Footsteps padded down the stairs, and Emily appeared small, blonde, and still in her fuzzy dinosaur pajamas. She eyed Claire with that blend of curiosity and caution unique to 10-year-olds. "Hi," she said. Claire hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Hi." "You look better this morning," Emily added. "You were all wet and shaky last night." Jake cleared his throat with a chuckle. "She means that kindly." Claire looked between them, this man and his daughter. There was a steadiness here, something she couldn't remember ever feeling, even if she didn't remember much of anything else. After breakfast, Jake stepped out to take a call from the sheriff's department. He kept his voice low but firm, answering a few procedural questions about the incident the night before. When he came back inside, Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into her cup of tea like it held secrets. "No match in the missing persons database," he said carefully. She looked up. "Nothing at all." Jake shook his head. "No one with your first name, approximate age, or description flagged any alerts. That doesn't mean you're not in there somewhere. Records can be messy, especially if your disappearance wasn't officially reported." Claire wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "So, I'm just no one." Jake sat across from her. "Let's not go jumping off that cliff just yet. You've got a name. You've got a heartbeat. That's more than some folks have to start with." He slid a pad of paper across the table. "I want you to try something. Close your eyes. Let the memories come without pushing. Any name, date, detail, even if it feels random. We'll follow any thread we get." Claire stared at the blank page. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she picked up the pen and began to write. Not a sentence. Not a name. Just one word. Willowmere. Jake leaned forward. What's that? Claire's brow furrowed. I don't know. It just came to me. Like a place. Or a house, maybe. Jake typed the word into his laptop. A few hits popped up: a lakeside retreat in Oregon, a vineyard in California, and a historic estate in northern Colorado. He clicked on the third result. Claire's hand went to her mouth. The black and white image on the screen, a sprawling mansion with ivy-covered walls and a wide circular drive, ignited something deep inside her. Her breath caught. I've been there. Jake's voice was calm, but his pulse quickened. Are you sure? Claire nodded, slow and trembling. The driveway. The stone fountain in the center. It had lilies. I used to count them. Jake turned the screen toward her. That's the Carlyle estate, or it was. Belonged to the Carlyle family until it was sold off in 2010. Abandoned now. Claire's eyes narrowed. Carlyle. That name. It feels. She stopped clutching her forehead. Pain. Sudden and sharp. Images crashed through her mind: a grand staircase, a man with salt and pepper hair playing a piano, a birthday cake with 10 candles. Then darkness. Jake was on his feet in seconds. Hey, you okay? She opened her eyes. There were tears in them. I think something bad happened there. Jake exchanged a glance with the pad of paper. Willowmere. Carlyle. 10 candles. He didn't say it aloud, but his instincts screamed louder than reason. Whoever Claire really was, someone didn't want her to remember. And they might be watching even now to make sure she never did. Jake Lawson wasn't prone to paranoia. A mechanic by trade and a single father by circumstance, he'd built his life around practical decisions, fixing what's broken, tightening what's loose, leaving the rest be. But as he stood at his workbench that evening, the battered silver chain in his hand, a different part of him stirred, the part that used to help the local search and rescue team, the part that still remembered what it meant to follow a thread until it snapped or revealed the truth. The chain was delicate, clearly old, but expertly crafted. The charm attached was a tiny oval locket, smooth on one side, engraved with a curling script on the other. To Sophie. Love always. Claire hadn't noticed the engraving earlier. It was Emily who spotted it that afternoon when Claire had set the necklace on the bathroom counter after a shower. She hadn't even realized she was wearing it until then. Jake had quietly taken it to his garage workshop after everyone went to bed. He flicked on the magnifying glass lamp, rotating the locket carefully. The clasp was solid, and with a bit of delicate pressure it popped open. Inside, aged but intact, was a tiny photo, a man with distinguished features, dark suit, gray temples, and a half-smile that looked forced. Jake blinked. The man seemed vaguely familiar. He'd seen that face somewhere. He opened his laptop and pulled up the article he'd found earlier: the Carlyle estate, once one of the most opulent properties in Colorado, now abandoned. The article featured a photo of the Carlyle family at a 2002 charity gala: Victor Carlyle, his wife Eleanor, and their daughter Sophie, age 10. Jake's breath caught. It was him, the man in the locket. Victor Carlyle. Jake leaned back slowly, the realization settling into his bones. Claire wasn't just connected to the estate. She was connected to the man who once owned half the county. And if she was Sophie Carlyle, then... He rubbed a hand across his face. The girl who vanished in the summer of 2002 during a stormy weekend of chaos and speculation was presumed dead after weeks of fruitless searches. The case had gone cold, buried beneath real estate lawsuits and corporate power struggles. No one had been charged. No body had been found. And now, over 2 decades later, a woman with no past showed up on the side of a road wearing the missing girl's necklace. Claire stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, her bare feet tucked beneath her. The stars above were faint, washed out by the thin cloud cover, but the air was still and the night eerily quiet. Jake stepped out and sat beside her. I found something, he said after a long pause. On your necklace. She turned eyes wide. What is it? He handed it to her. She studied the locket, then slowly opened it. When her eyes landed on the photograph, something inside her cracked. She didn't cry, not yet, but her breathing changed, shallow then held. "I know him," she whispered. Jake said nothing, just let the silence do its work. "I used to sit beside him," she continued, voice brittle. "He'd play piano. Badly. He'd laugh at his own mistakes. Do you know his name?" She nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Victor." Jake gently confirmed, "Victor Carlyle. Your father, if this locket means what we think it does." Claire blinked, stunned by how the word father echoed inside her like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. "I don't remember him fully," she admitted. "Just flashes, emotions, music, but it feels like home and fear at the same time." Jake leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Claire, I think you might be Sophie Carlyle." The name hung in the air. "I Googled it." He continued more cautiously now. "You disappeared in 2002, age 10. There was a media frenzy, but no answers, no suspects, just vanished." Claire stared into the night as if looking back in time. "That summer," she murmured, "there was a party, so many people. I remember flowers, white roses in every room. My mom wore pearls. My dad, he was arguing with someone, loud voices. I hid in the hallway." She closed her eyes, the memory surfacing like a slow-moving tide. "Then there was a woman. Red lipstick. She took my hand and said we were going somewhere safe. She smelled like smoke and lavender." Jake stiffened. "Do you remember where she took you?" Claire shook her head. "I remember a car, rain on the windows, and then pain, like falling." She pressed her fingers to her temple. Then nothing. Jake didn't push further. Trauma layered over time could be dangerous to peel too fast. "Whoever took you, they didn't want you found," he said quietly. "But something went wrong. You didn't stay hidden." Claire looked at him, the question forming in her eyes before it reached her lips. "Why now? Why am I only remembering this now?" Jake shook his head. "That's the question, isn't it?" Back inside, Jake tucked Emily into bed, then sat at the dining table long after the house had gone quiet. The article on his screen glowed softly. "Carlyle heiress disappears estate in legal turmoil." He stared at the headline, heart pounding. If Claire really was Sophie Carlyle, this wasn't just a personal mystery anymore, it was a legal powder keg. He made a silent vow, no matter how deep this went, no matter who tried to stop it, he'd help her find the truth. Not just because it was the right thing to do, but because he was starting to care more than he should. And caring Jake Lawson knew had a way of rewriting destinies. The Carlyle estate wasn't listed on any GPS app. Jake had to dig through county property archives to find the coordinates, a trick he'd learned years ago when tracking a missing hiker for the volunteer search and rescue team. The estate hadn't been sold in over a decade. Technically, it was still tied up in probate after Eleanor Carlyle's death. No one lived there. No one paid taxes on it. It was in legal limbo and physical ruin. Perfect place for a secret to be buried. Claire sat beside him in the truck, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The road wound through thick pine woods, the afternoon sun breaking through the branches in fleeting patches. She hadn't spoken since they left. She just stared out the window, eyes focused on nothing, or perhaps too many things at once. Jake glanced at her. "You sure you want to do this?" Claire didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "I don't know if I want to, but I need to." Jake nodded. That was good enough for him. The estate emerged slowly behind a bend in the trees like something exhaled from a forgotten century. The wrought iron gate, once ornate, now sagged under rust and moss. Beyond it, the mansion stood tall but weathered. Ivy choked the once grand columns. Windows were clouded or broken. The circular drive was cracked weeds breaking through its surface like scars. Claire's breath hitched. Jake parked the truck, stepped out, and pushed the gate open with a slow groan of metal. Claire followed every step on the gravel, loud in the silence. She stopped at the edge of the drive. "I've been here before." Jake turned to her. "What do you remember?" She pointed toward the center of the circular drive. "There was a fountain here. White lilies floated in it. I used to sit there and count them." He looked. The stone basin was still there, though empty and cracked, long dry. A few weeds had grown up through the base, but in the center, just visible under dirt and moss, was a metal lily. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. The look on her face said it all. Inside the mansion smelled of dust and old wood. Their footsteps echoed as they moved through the vast entry hall past the twin staircase that curved upward like wings. Sheets covered the furniture, though most were tattered by time and mice. Sunlight filtered through dirty glass, catching motes of dust like falling stars. Claire's steps slowed as they passed the parlor. She stopped at the doorway. There, she whispered. Jake followed her gaze. In the corner stood a grand piano, its black lacquer dulled, a few keys exposed where the cover had warped. "My father used to play," she said. "Badly, but he loved it." She moved to the bench, sat down slowly, and lifted the lid. Her fingers hovered over the keys, uncertain, then landed gently. The first note was soft, hesitant. The second, clearer. She played a broken melody, halting and unsure, but then her hands found something familiar. The tune shifted, melancholy and delicate. Jake watched, barely breathing. When she reached the final note, Claire sat still, her hands trembling. "I remember that song," she said, voice cracking. "He wrote it for me." Jake stepped closer. "Do you remember what happened here?" Claire looked around the room. Then her eyes narrowed on a hallway to the left. "I hid there," she said. The night everything changed. She stood and walked almost in a trance. The hallway was narrow-lined with faded portraits. Halfway down, she stopped in front of a tall wooden door. The brass knob was tarnished. Her hand reached out, stopped, then turned it slowly. It was a study. Inside, dust lay thick on every surface. A large desk sat beneath the window papers, strewn like someone had left in a hurry. On the wall behind it, a painting hung askew, a portrait of Victor Carlyle, same as the locket but younger. Confident, commanding. Claire walked slowly to the center of the room and stood still. There was yelling, she said, eyes far away. He and another man. I couldn't hear all of it, but they were arguing about money, control. Then my mother screamed. She clutched her head. I ran out the back, through the kitchen, down to the trees. A woman found me there. I don't remember her name, just red lipstick. She told me not to cry, said we were going away, that my father wanted her to take me. Jake felt a chill crawl across his shoulders. "Do you think it was planned?" he asked. "Your father arranged to hide you?" Claire's eyes filled. "I don't know, but I don't think I ever saw him again." They stayed a few more minutes, walking the halls like ghosts tracing their own footsteps. Claire lingered by the grand staircase, running her fingers along the banister. Jake noticed her stop and crouched near a corner of the step. "What is it?" She picked up a tiny object, rusted but clearly once gold. A hairpin. "It was mine," she said softly. "I wore it that night." Jake took it from her gently and placed it in a handkerchief. "That's memory," he said, "and that's evidence." Claire gave him a look, half smile, half sorrow. Isn't it the same thing sometimes? They left the house in silence. The air outside felt heavier, charged, like the woods were listening. Claire stopped just before stepping back into the truck. "I think someone in that house wanted me gone," she said quietly, "but not my father." Jake's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "Then we'll find out who." Because now it wasn't just about helping her remember. It was about making sure no one ever tried to make her disappear again. Jake stared at the photo on his screen, the blue light of his laptop casting sharp shadows across his face. The image was old, a scanned clipping from the Denver Herald, dated June 17, 2002. It showed the Carlisle family at the Willowmere Children's Benefit Gala, one of Colorado's biggest high society events of the year. Victor Carlisle in a charcoal tuxedo, dignified. Eleanor Carlisle, regal in white silk. And, between them, a smiling girl in a ruffled lavender dress. Sophie Carlisle, age 10. Jake leaned back slowly. The resemblance to Claire was no longer a question of coincidence. It was undeniable. The headline read, "Carlisle Heiress Vanishes After Gala Search Underway." The story painted a carefully edited picture Sophie had gone to bed early after the gala and was discovered missing the next morning. No sign of forced entry. No ransom note. The family had remained tight-lipped. The search at the time had made national news for 2 weeks before quietly fading into the noise of other crises. What the article didn't say was far louder. Claire sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. Her eyes were fixed on the wall, but her mind was far elsewhere. There were white roses everywhere. She said, her voice barely above a whisper. I remember that night. The gala. I hated the dress. It itched. Jake looked up from his seat across the table. Claire continued, eyes growing more distant with every word. The house was full of people. Waiters in white gloves. Flashbulbs. Music. My mother had her arm around me all night too tightly. I think she was scared. Or angry. I couldn't tell then. But I feel it now. Jake said nothing. He let her speak. There was a man with a scar on his cheek. He brought my father a stack of papers. My father. He refused to sign them. I remember him yelling and my mother whispering something sharp in his ear. She shivered. Then the storm came. Lightning. The lights flickered. And that's when I ran upstairs. I hid in the hallway closet. I wanted the night to just end. Jake leaned forward. And then I must have fallen asleep in there. Or passed out. I don't remember. But when I woke up, it wasn't my room. It wasn't even the same house. Everything smelled like smoke and something sweet. Lavender. Jake froze. Claire met his gaze, voice tightening. She was there. The woman with red lipstick. She told me my name was Emily, that I was going to stay somewhere else for a while, that my parents had sent me. Jake opened a drawer beside him and pulled out a printed copy of the estate's ownership history. Carlisle Manor had sat untouched for years after Eleanor's death in 2008. The company had splintered. The assets were divided up except for Willowmere. It had become a ghost property, and that never happened by accident. Claire, he said carefully, if you really are Sophie Carlisle, there are people who may not want that known. People who stood to gain everything by keeping you gone. Claire looked down. But why would my father send me away? And why didn't anyone ever come for me? Jake exhaled slowly. Maybe he did send you away, but not to lose you. Maybe he thought it was the only way to keep you safe. Something might have happened that night. Something so big he had to make you disappear. He pulled out the locket again and placed it gently on the table between them. And I don't think he ever stopped loving you. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she touched the silver. For a moment, silence fell between them, thick and aching. Then Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Maggie Ryland, an old friend and local reporter. He answered quickly. Maggie. I did a dig through the archive room at the Herald, like you asked, she said. You're not going to like what I found. Jake stood. What is it? There was a sealed affidavit filed in 2003 by a housekeeper who worked at the Carlisle estate. She claimed she saw Sophie leave the house that night with a woman she didn't recognize. The statement was suppressed. Buried. The files stamped, per court order, confidential. Jake's jaw tightened. Someone covered it up. Not just someone Maggie said. There was a judge involved. Corporate lawyers. The kind of pressure that only money or power can buy. Jake glanced at Claire, who had grown paler with each word. Can you send me the document I already did? But Jake, if that woman's really Sophie, you're not just holding someone's secret. You're holding someone's threat. He ended the call slowly and sat back down. "You're not crazy," he said softly. "You didn't imagine any of this." Claire looked at him, tears brimming. "I wasn't supposed to survive, was I?" Jake reached across the table and took her hand. "No, but you did. And now we finish what your father started." Claire nodded slowly, and for the first time a flicker of strength returned to her eyes. The summer of 2002 had taken her name, her home, and her childhood. It was time she took it back. Jake parked the truck outside the Silver Ridge Public Library, killing the engine, but not the tension that sat coiled in his chest. Claire hadn't spoken much since they left the house. She was clutching the printout of the affidavit like it might disappear if she let go the one that mentioned a red lipsticked woman escorting a 10-year-old Sophie Carlyle into a car the night she vanished. He watched her for a moment. She was staring blankly at the library doors, face unreadable, but her fingers betrayed her fidgeting at the hem of her sleeve, twisting and releasing in a rhythm of barely held control. "You don't have to come in," Jake offered. "I can bring him out to the truck." Claire shook her head. "If he's the man who knew my mother, I want to see his face." Jake gave a small nod and stepped out. Inside the library was warm and quiet, the smell of paper and polished oak welcoming like an old friend. Sitting at the far reading table was a man in a gray tweed coat, spectacles balanced near the edge of his nose, a thin leather satchel at his side. David Lorne. He stood when Jake approached. "You must be Lawson, and you must be the lawyer who doesn't like phone calls." Lorne allowed himself a small smile. "I prefer to deliver certain truths eye to eye." Jake gestured toward the doors. "She's outside. You can tell her yourself." A beat passed. Then Lorne picked up the satchel. "Let's not keep her waiting." Claire stood beside the truck, arms crossed tightly. When Lorne saw her, his stride faltered. His expression softened, aged by something beyond years' recognition, maybe. Or guilt. "Sophie." He breathed. "My God." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Do you really know me? I knew your mother, Eleanor, very well. She trusted me. Before she passed, she gave me a letter, told me to hold on to it until—" He hesitated. "Until you came back." He opened his satchel and pulled out a yellowed envelope. On the front, in delicate cursive, "For Sophie, if she returns." Claire took it with shaking hands. The paper was worn soft from years of being touched, maybe read, then put away again. She turned away from them slightly and began to read silently. Jake watched the shift in her posture from stiff to trembling, then to something he couldn't name. When she finally lowered the letter, her cheeks were wet. She knew Claire whispered. She knew they were going to come after me. Jake stepped closer. "Who?" Claire looked at Lorne. "My father's board of trustees. The night of the gala, they tried to force him to hand over control of Carlyle Industries. He refused. They threatened him." Lorne nodded solemnly. Victor knew they were ready to use legal means, but he suspected they might go further. He didn't trust anyone, not even Eleanor at first. But she proved herself. "The letter says she arranged for a friend, a woman named Lisette, to take you away the night of the gala. Temporarily. Just until Victor could neutralize the threat." Claire clenched the letter. "But something went wrong. She never came back for me," she whispered. Lorne sighed. Eleanor tried. But 2 days later, Victor suffered a stroke and fell into a coma. By the time he recovered, months had passed and Eleanor was dying from cancer. She couldn't find you. Whoever Lisette was, she vanished without a trace. Jake felt the chill creep back into his spine. "This sounds like a conspiracy novel," he muttered. "Only people don't vanish like that in real life." Lorne looked at him. "When billions are at stake, people vanish exactly like that." They moved to the park nearby, settled under the gazebo where autumn leaves drifted across the planks like burnt orange confetti. Claire clutched the letter while Jake reviewed the documents. Lorne had brought original trust deeds, excerpts from Eleanor's will, and one final shocker, a provision in the Carlyle family trust that named Sophie as sole heir to Victor's personal estate if she could prove her identity. Jake frowned. There's no birth certificate in here. No DNA match. How do we prove? There's something stronger than a certificate. Lorne said quietly and reached into his satchel once more. He handed Jake a sealed black envelope. Inside was a photograph, a Polaroid of a young girl in a lavender dress standing beside a man at a piano. Claire. And Victor. Claire took it slowly, staring at it as if she were staring into a memory made flesh. This was that night. I found it in Eleanor's jewelry box, Lorne explained. She said if Sophie ever returned and didn't remember who she was, show her this. Claire nodded, her voice steady now. Then it's time to remember. That night, back at Jake's house, she laid the letter beside her on the kitchen table. Emily was asleep upstairs, and the house was quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood settling. Claire pored over every line of the letter over and over as if she could pull her mother's voice through the page. And maybe in a way she did. I loved you more than the name we carried, more than the empire they built. If you are reading this, it means you survived. And now, my darling girl, I need you to finish what we couldn't. Claire folded the letter and looked at Jake. They tried to erase me, but I'm still here. Jake nodded. Then let's make sure the world knows it, because Sophie Carlyle had returned, and her silence was about to end. The Carlyle boardroom hadn't changed much since the early 2000s. Same cherrywood paneling, same vaulted ceiling and chandelier, same heavy scent of old money and older secrets. But today, something new sat at the head of the long, polished table. A ghost. Or rather, the woman they all thought long buried, Sophie Carlyle, now calling herself Claire. Jake stood beside her wearing a crisp collared shirt he rarely used, arms folded tight across his chest. David Lorne flanked her left briefcase, open documents aligned with surgical precision. Across the table sat 4 members of the Carlyle Board of Trustees. All of them looked like they hadn't decided whether to be shocked, afraid, or amused. The woman in the center, Evelyn Graves, offered a thin, practiced smile. Her silver hair was pulled back into a perfect twist, her pearl earrings cold as frost. "My dear," she began, voice syrupy with patronization, "you must understand how extraordinary your story sounds. A girl presumed dead for over 20 years reappears with a mechanic and a half-baked narrative." Jake's jaw tensed, but Claire placed a calming hand on his arm. "I'm not here to make you comfortable, Ms. Graves," Claire said, calm and clear. "I'm here because this is my family's company, and I have the right to know what happened the night my name vanished from every record." Graves leaned back in her chair. "Let's say for the sake of this charade that you are Sophie Carlyle. Why now? Why come crawling out of the woodwork because you made sure I couldn't do it?" Before Claire replied, "You buried my name, you sealed my mother's affidavit, and you paid off the woman who was supposed to protect me." Graves' eyes flickered just for a second. "Enough." David slid a folder across the table. Affidavit 4117C, sealed under judicial discretion in 2003, reopened 2 weeks ago under media reform statutes. Signed by a former housekeeper who saw a red-lipped woman escort Sophie Carlyle out of the estate the night she disappeared. Graves didn't even look at it. "We've survived hostile takeovers, federal audits, and a stock collapse. You think a decades-old ghost story will move shareholders?" Claire opened her mother's letter, the original, and laid it before them. "This is what will move them." Graves gave it a glance and then looked away. "The court won't accept an unsigned letter as proof of anything." Jake stepped forward. "She doesn't need a court to reclaim her identity. She already has. We're not here to take the company. We're here to expose what was done to a 10-year-old girl so powerful people could keep their seats." Evelyn's smile sharpened. "Power is what built Carlyle Industries. Don't act shocked it was used." Claire stood her chair, scraping the floor. "I'm not afraid of power," she said. "I grew up in it. But I watched it break my family, erase my name, and rewrite the truth. And I remember now." She leaned forward. "You think this ends in a boardroom no? It ends when children like me like I was stop disappearing so executives can feel safe. Silence gripped the room. For once, even Evelyn Graves had no quick rebuttal. Claire nodded toward David. We're not suing. Not yet. We're launching a public foundation in my father's name, the Victor Carlisle Initiative. Its mission: protecting children displaced or hidden due to legal loopholes and corruption. And if anyone on this board stands in the way, we'll tell the world exactly how far you went to bury me. Evelyn's lips thinned. A threat. No, Claire said, eyes clear. A promise. Outside the building, Jake exhaled hard as the heavy glass doors closed behind them. Remind me never to get in your way. Claire gave him a sideways glance. I had to face them. I couldn't let them win again. Jake smiled. You didn't just face them, Claire. You stood taller than the whole room. She looked up at the city skyline, not in awe, but in reclamation. For years, these buildings had been part of a world she never got to grow into. Now, she didn't need to belong to it to stand tall within it. That night, back in Silver Ridge, Emily ran out to greet them as they stepped out of the truck. Claire bent to her level. I missed you. Emily grinned. I drew you something. She held up a crayon drawing a house 3 stick figures a son wearing sunglasses. Claire looked at Jake, who shrugged. She insisted you were part of the family portrait now. Claire swallowed a lump in her throat. No inheritance, no boardroom, no title had ever meant as much as this. Later, as twilight wrapped around the porch, Claire sat beside Jake in silence, a blanket around her shoulders. I thought I had to choose, she said finally. Power or peace. Jake waited. But maybe the real power is peace. Not hiding, not letting them scare me into silence. Jake turned to her. And what about love? Claire smiled, tired but full. That part, I'm still learning. Jake gently reached for her hand. No rush, he said. Some things are worth remembering slowly. Claire didn't sleep that night. Her body lay in bed wrapped in the comfort of the Lawson home, the scent of cedar and clean sheets, the gentle hum of wind brushing the window panes, but her mind refused rest. The letter from her mother echoed through her thoughts like the final note of a piano song that never resolved. Finish what we couldn't. But how do you finish a story when you still don't know who wrote the ending? By dawn, she was up. Jake found her at the kitchen counter dressed sipping coffee she hadn't touched. You're sure about this? He asked. She nodded. The public needs to hear it, not through lawyers or articles. From me. He studied her for a long moment, then placed his hand on hers. I'll be right there. The set of Morning Colorado was cooler than Claire expected. A crew member applied one last touch of powder to her cheek before stepping back. The studio lights were bright but not unkind. The host, Alana Breen, sat opposite her, all warmth and perfectly angled sympathy. The cameras were just out of frame, red lights blinking steadily like unblinking eyes. Claire's palms were damp. Behind the scenes, Jake stood by a monitor watching. 30 seconds to live. She closed her eyes. White roses, piano keys. A woman's hand, red nails tightening on hers. A hallway that felt too quiet. A child's voice somewhere deep inside screaming without sound. The countdown ended. The cameras rolled. Joining us today is a woman whose story has both captivated and shaken Colorado. Alana began. For over 20 years, the name Sophie Carlisle has been synonymous with mystery and heartbreak. Today, she sits with us ready to reclaim her voice. Claire nodded softly as the camera zoomed in. I was 10 years old. She began her voice low but firm. I went to bed one night in the Carlisle estate. The next morning, I woke up somewhere else with someone I didn't know. She told me my parents had sent me away, that I had a new name, a new life. Alana leaned forward. Claire, may I call you that? What do you remember? Now Claire took a breath. Storms, music, my father's voice, a promise that he'd fix everything. But then, silence. I was passed around, kept quiet. I was told to forget, that the people I once knew never existed. She turned slightly, addressing not just the host but the viewers beyond the lens. But I'm here, and I remember. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to know that I was taken, hidden, for the sake of control power money. There was a long pause. The room felt too still. Then Alana asked gently the question Claire had been bracing for. Do you believe your father was part of it? Claire's breath caught. Her throat tightened. Jake's eyes locked on her from the wings. She answered carefully with a steadiness that surprised even her. No. I believe my father tried to protect me. I believe he sent me away to keep me from something dark. And I believe he died before he could bring me home. But before Alana could continue, something unexpected happened. The screen behind them flickered, meant to show a pre-selected slideshow of photos. Instead, a grainy, previously unseen security video played. Claire froze. It showed the Carlisle estate, the front entrance, time-stamped the night of the gala, June 15, 2002. A girl in a lavender dress stepped out of the front door, guided by a woman in dark clothes. The camera angle was poor, but her hair, long, dark braided, matched what Claire remembered. The girl paused at the door, looked back toward the house, and hesitated. Then she disappeared into the back of a waiting car. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Jake rushed to the edge of the set as the crew scrambled. Alana tried to maintain control, but whispers erupted among the producers. Claire turned toward the monitor in stunned silence. "Where did that come from?" she asked, breath shaking. No one answered. Then a studio assistant leaned in and whispered something to Alana. Alana turned to Claire with a strained smile. "We've just received word that an anonymous source submitted this footage to our newsroom this morning, claiming it proves that your abduction wasn't an abduction at all, but an arranged departure." Claire stood. The air changed. "I was a child," she said, voice rising. "A child doesn't arrange anything. A child doesn't sign away her identity or her name. You don't get to rewrite what happened just because you found a clip with poor resolution." Her hands were trembling, but her voice grew stronger. "Whoever sent that video didn't send it to help. They sent it to blur the truth, to make it seem like I left willingly. But they forget something. I remember what it felt like to be taken. The cameras were still rolling, and now the truth, her truth, was burning across the screens of millions." She looked dead into the lens. "To whoever sent that clip, I see what you're doing. But I'm not that child anymore, and you don't scare me." Later in the parking garage, Jake pulled her into the safety of his arms as her body shook. "They wanted to rattle you," he murmured. "But you didn't flinch. You fought back." "I didn't expect it," she whispered. "I thought the danger was over." Jake held her tighter. "It's not over. Not yet. But now. They've shown their hand." Claire stepped back, brushing tears from her cheek. "Then we show them ours." That night, alone in her room, Claire replayed the footage, frame by frame. She froze it. The car, the woman's silhouette, and there reflected faintly in the polished window glass was a second figure. A man. Watching, not helping, not stopping. She leaned in closer and whispered almost to herself, "I know that face." The morning sun rose reluctantly over Silver Ridge, as if even the light hesitated to disturb the truth waiting in the dark. Claire sat at Jake's kitchen table, the video still open on her laptop. The moment was frozen, the faint reflection in the car window half obscured, distorted, but unmistakably human. She couldn't look away. "I've seen him," before she said more to herself than to Jake, who stood behind her, arms crossed, tension sharp in every line of his face. Jake leaned closer. "Are you sure it's not just your mind trying to fill in the blanks?" Claire zoomed in again, pixelating the face beyond recognition. But she didn't need clarity to feel the certainty in her bones. "I don't remember his name," she said, "but I remember the way he made me feel. I was afraid of him. I used to run when I heard his voice in the hallway." Jake frowned. "Could he have worked for your father?" Claire shook her head. "He didn't work for him. He watched him. There's a difference." Jake made a call to David Lorne, who arrived just after 10 with a portable scanner and a thick stack of old documents. Claire's description had stirred something in the lawyer, something that made him move faster than his age usually allowed. "I've gone through Carlisle Industries' archived employee files from 2001-2003, David explained as he set up. Executives, contractors, household staff, personal security. Most of it's boilerplate. But there was one anomaly. He pulled out a thin file and laid it on the table. Matthew Dane. Private contractor. No social security number on file. Hired under a special consultant clause for Victor Carlisle's personal security detail. Started 3 months before Sophie disappeared. Terminated 2 weeks after." Claire's hand moved to her throat. "That's him." Jake opened the file. A grainy ID photo stared back sunken cheeks, pale eyes, a jaw too sharp for comfort. It matched the ghostly face in the window. Lorne nodded grimly. "He wasn't vetted through normal channels. I found a sealed envelope from Eleanor in my legal files with his name on it. She wrote, 'If Sophie returns, ask where Dane is.'" Claire's voice dropped. So she knew. She knew he had something to do with it. That afternoon, Jake and Claire drove to the edge of Denver where Lorne had traced Dane's last known address, a rundown warehouse-turned-condo near the old rail yards. They didn't go inside. Jake insisted on staying in the truck while Claire watched from the passenger seat, heart pounding. Through binoculars, they spotted a man exiting the building. Gray jacket, same sharp features. He moved slowly like someone with nothing to hide and nothing to rush toward. Claire didn't breathe. "That's him." Jake nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we're not confronting him alone." Back in Silver Ridge, Claire sat alone in Emily's room that night, watching her sleep. The girl's chest rose and fell in the soft rhythm of dreams, a stuffed dinosaur tucked under one arm. Claire smiled faintly. That used to be her once. A child in silk dresses tucked in by people she thought would never leave, never lie. And then a flash, a whisper, a vanishing. She brushed a hand over Emily's hair and whispered, "You'll never lose yourself. I'll make sure of it." Downstairs, Jake waited. Claire joined him, barefoot, quiet. "He's still out there," she said. Jake nodded. "I know, but we're not alone this time. I reached out to someone I trust." The next day, they met Detective Lynna James, retired but well-connected, and one of Jake's oldest friends from his volunteer rescue days. Lynna had the bearing of someone who'd stared down lies her entire career and learned to read the truth in the spaces between words. She listened to Claire's story without interrupting. Then she reviewed the photo, the affidavit, and the broadcast recording. When she looked up, her voice was steel. "I know who Dane is." He was part of a private security firm that specialized in asset recovery corporate speak for handling people who got in the way. Claire's breath caught. "I was an asset." "To someone you were," Lynna continued. "The firm dissolved in 2004 after a congressional investigation. Quiet settlement, buried records. But if Dane was involved, he didn't act alone. He was a pawn. The question is for whose game?" Claire swallowed hard. "Evelyn Graves." Lynna gave a slow nod. "I suspected you'd say that." Jake stepped forward. "Can we bring this to the police?" "Make it public," Lynna hesitated. "Not yet. The legal risk is massive. But if we can connect Dane directly to Evelyn, then we have something no NDA or sealed court file can bury." Claire's eyes sharpened. "Then we make him talk." That night, as the wind rose outside and thunder grumbled low in the west, Claire sat at her window watching the trees sway. Her mother's letter lay on the windowsill. She picked it up again, fingertips tracing the worn edges. "If you are reading this, it means you survived." She folded the letter and closed her eyes. "I did more than survive, Mom," she whispered. "I came back. And I remember." In her dream that night, she stood at the Carlisle estate's front steps again. But this time, she didn't run. She walked through the front doors, past the whispers, past the shadows toward the grand piano. And there, waiting, was the man with the pale eyes. smiling. The sky over Silver Ridge cracked open with rain. Not the soft, cleansing kind, but a heavy, wind-whipped downpour that soaked the earth like it had something to prove. Claire stood beneath the overhang of Jake's garage watching the rivulets streak across the driveway like veins searching for a heart. Inside the house, Jake and Lynna were still discussing legal strategy, what could be used, what would be challenged, and what might simply vanish if they pushed too fast. But Claire needed air. She needed space to think, to decide. She looked down at the envelope in her hand. It was cream-colored, slightly damp now at the corners, embossed with the seal of Carlisle Industries. Inside was an official offer, or perhaps a bribe dressed in formality, a seat at the executive table, a non-disclosure clause, and a reconnection grant, totaling $15 million. All wrapped in the language of reconciliation. And the message between the lines was clear. Take the money, take the name, and stay quiet. Jake appeared beside her, a mug of tea in hand. He passed it to her. You didn't answer them yet, he said quietly. Claire shook her head. I've answered them 100 times in my head, and every version feels like betrayal, either to them or to myself. Jake leaned against the railing. You don't owe them anything. Not your silence, not your cooperation, and not your name. She sipped the tea. It was warm, steady like him. I thought reclaiming my identity would feel like victory, she said, but all I feel is hollow. I don't want to wear a name they used to erase me. Jake nodded. Then don't. She looked at him. Walk away from it, he said. From the title, the power, all of it. You've already proven who you are, not through inheritance, but through the way you fought to remember, to be seen. That's what Emily sees. That's what I see. Claire turned back toward the rain, the silence between them rich and unsaid. That evening, she sat with Emily at the kitchen table, helping her with a school art project, a collage about what makes a family. Emily had cut out magazine pictures, a porch swing, a hand holding a child's pie on a windowsill. And right in the center, she'd drawn 3 stick figures, one tall with brown hair, one small with pigtails, and one with a curly ponytail and a big smile. That one's you, Emily said, proudly pointing. Claire felt the lump rise in her throat. I love that she whispered. Emily tilted her head. So, are you going to be in our family for real now? Claire blinked back emotion. Would you want that? Emily beamed. Duh. Later that night, Claire sat alone in Jake's small study. The letter from Carlisle Industries was on the desk, untouched. Next to it, a blank notepad. A pen. She picked it up, wrote one word across the page. Claire Lawson. She stared at it. It wasn't a name forged by bloodline or bound by expectation. It was chosen, claimed, not a title to protect, but a life to build. The next morning, Claire walked into the Silver Ridge courthouse and filled out the paperwork to legally change her name. She used no fanfare, no press, just Jake. And Emily, who sat outside on a bench with a juice box swinging her feet, unaware she was witnessing the rebirth of someone who had once been forgotten. When the clerk asked her reason for the change, Claire simply said, "Because I finally know who I am." Back at home, Jake found her on the porch swing. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Lighter," she replied. "Like the past is still there, but it's no longer holding the pen." Jake handed her a folder. Inside was a certificate, not the name change, but something else. "What's this?" He smiled. "Official charter for the Sophie Carlisle Foundation. You said you didn't want to carry the name, but maybe it can still help someone." Claire stared at it, heart swelling. "A foundation," she said softly. Jake nodded. "For kids who fall through the cracks, who get lost between systems, between stories like you did, except now they'll have someone looking." Claire didn't speak, just reached for his hand and held it. No fortune, no press release, just 2 hands holding on to something real. A name, a family, a purpose, not inherited, earned. The house was quiet that morning. Claire stood in the doorway of the garage watching Jake pack up tools into the back of his truck. It was a Saturday, normally his one day off, but she knew he'd volunteered to fix the brakes on a neighbor's pickup because he needed the space to think. He always did that, worked with his hands when his heart was full. She stepped out slowly. Got room for one more. Jake turned startled, then smiled. Always. She walked toward him, slowly, purposefully. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid. The one Emily insisted made her look strong and ready. She wore jeans and an old sweatshirt of Jake's that hung on her like comfort. But her eyes, they carried the weight of a decision. "I need to tell you something," she said. Jake set the wrench down and gave her his full attention. "I got a call this morning," she continued, "from Evelyn." Jake stiffened. What did she want? She said the foundation announcement has the board nervous. Said I should consider withdrawing the name Carlyle before I draw attention to old wounds. Claire smiled bitterly. Funny, considering she helped cause most of them. Jake's voice was low. "What did you say?" "I said no," she answered. Then I hung up. He nodded slowly, then met her gaze. "You sure you're ready for all this, Claire? This life? It won't be easy. You're stepping out in the open. There'll be people watching, judging, trying to control the narrative." Claire stepped closer. "I've lived 20 years with no voice, Jake. I'm not afraid of being seen anymore. But there's something else." Jake looked at her eyes, narrowing slightly. "What is it? I'm not staying in the city," she said. "I don't want boardrooms or interviews. I don't want to be Sophie Carlyle, the missing heiress. That chapter's written, but the rest of the story, I want to write it here. With you." Jake's breath caught. Claire continued, her voice unshaking. "You found me when I didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything, just made space for me, gave me a home when I didn't have one, and never asked me to be anyone else." She took his hand. "And now I want to be here because I choose to be. Not because I'm hiding or surviving, but because I'm alive." Jake looked at her, searching her eyes, and found nothing but truth. "I never thought I'd fall in love again," he said quietly. "But then you came along barefoot, scared, and drenched in rain, and somehow everything after that made sense." She smiled. "So what do we do now?" He squeezed her hand. "We live," he said, "one ordinary, beautiful day at a time." That afternoon, Claire, Jake, and Emily drove out to the edge of the county where the land opened up in broad golden fields broken only by a small, unused community center with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch. A "for sale" sign leaned crookedly in the yard. Emily jumped out of the truck and ran up the steps. "This is it, right? This is the one." Claire nodded, heart-pounding with a new kind of anticipation. "This is the headquarters of the Sophie Carlyle Foundation," she said. "Or it will be." Jake chuckled. "Gonna need a lot of paint." "We've got time," she said. They walked through the old building, tracing their fingers along dusty woodwork, peeking into sunlit rooms where laughter hadn't echoed in years. Emily found a stack of old art supplies in a closet and declared one room the Creativity Lab. Jake paused in what used to be a small library and said, "You could teach here. Workshops, outreach, maybe even mentoring." Claire looked around. "I don't want to just give out grants. I want to be part of it. Present. Grounded." He grinned. "Then this is a good place to grow something real." That night back home, they gathered on the porch with hot cocoa and blankets. The stars stretched over the Colorado sky like a map of second chances. Claire looked at Emily, curled up beside her. "Do you remember the night I first came here?" she asked. Emily nodded. "You were cold and didn't say much." Claire smiled. "That sounds right." Emily sipped her cocoa. "You talk a lot now." Jake laughed. Claire leaned into them both and whispered, "I was lost, but you helped me find home." She didn't need a last name to feel whole anymore. But if she had to choose one, she'd choose the one Emily gave her in crayon scribbled over a drawing of a porch and 3 stick figures. Lawson. Not because it was given to her, but because she earned it every step, every memory, every scar she reclaimed. And now it was hers. Spring in Colorado had a way of sneaking up quietly, not with grand declarations, but in small signs, the whisper of green at the edge of old fields, the soft bloom of wildflowers pressing through cracked sidewalks, and the scent of pine carried on a warmer wind. It was the kind of season made for beginnings. Claire stood at the edge of the newly painted community center porch, her arms folded over a clipboard. The Sophie Carlyle Foundation banner now hung proudly above the entrance, pale blue stitched by hand fluttering softly in the breeze. Below it, a group of children gathered in a circle for their first storytelling workshop. Claire watched them through the window, their eyes-wide pencils clutched tightly in small fingers. They were drawing stories from their hearts, some messy, some hesitant, all brave. She smiled. That used to be her once. Behind her, Jake walked out carrying a pitcher of lemonade. One of the kids just asked if they could build a treehouse out back. Claire chuckled. We're supposed to be helping with trauma recovery, not teaching reckless carpentry. Jake grinned. Sounds like recovery to me. They stood side by side watching the kids laugh. This place? Claire said softly, it was never supposed to exist. Not with that name. Not with my name. Jake looked at her. That name carries weight now. Hope. Not because of who you were, but because of what you chose to do with it. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her mother's letter, now laminated and folded, carried not as a burden, but as a compass. She wanted me to finish what they started. I think this is what she meant. Jake nodded, voice warm. You've already finished it, Claire. Now it's yours to begin. The opening ceremony was simple. No press, no media circus, just the town of Silver Ridge friends, a few local families, and one former housekeeper named Maribel, who drove all the way from Boulder just to hug Claire and whisper, I knew you'd come back. Emily stood on a milk crate to give her speech hands, fidgeting as she read from a piece of notebook paper. My family is different, she said proudly. I don't have a mom like everyone else, but I have a Claire, and she found her way back, so I think she's kind of magic. The crowd melted into soft laughter and teary smiles. Claire held her breath through it all. Not from fear, from awe. Because this was the ending she never saw coming. Not wealth, not power, but healing. Wholeness. A story that after decades of silence had finally found its voice. That evening, as twilight spilled lavender across the horizon, Jake lit a small fire in the backyard pit. Emily danced barefoot around the lawn, holding sparklers left over from last 4th of July. Claire sat wrapped in a blanket, legs curled under her, watching the stars blink into view. Jake handed her a cup of tea. You know, he said, for someone who arrived with no past, you've managed to build one incredible future. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. Because I stopped running from it. I stopped letting the pain write the last page. He looked at her eyes, shining. So, what comes next? Claire smiled, slow and full. Whatever we write together. Later that night, as the fire burned low and the world around them quieted, Claire stepped into her room, their room now, and opened a small box she kept on her nightstand. Inside were 3 things. 1. The silver locket, tarnished but still whole. 2. The old photo of her and her father at the piano. 3. And a drawing from Emily 3 stick figures under a banner that read, Home. She placed the drawing on the wall, took the locket in her hand, and whispered, I found my way back, Dad. And I'm okay now. Outside, the wind carried the sound of children laughing in the distance, not haunted, not hiding, just being. Claire stepped onto the porch, the stars above lighting her path. And in that moment, she knew she wasn't the girl who vanished anymore. She was the woman who returned. And this time, she wasn't going anywhere. What would you have done if someone you loved disappeared and returned not remembering who they were? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what part of this story touched you the most? If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us bring you more powerful, heartwarming stories just like this. And, above all, thank you for being here, for listening, for feeling. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.